Alright, everyone, we've got Smiles Rant number 8. I'm going to be going over some sort of classic setups and applying them to the current age, just for anyone who's looking for ideas what to do with their kingdom. All of these are 25-man can setups, and they're basically just the best thing I can remember about certain setups I've seen or played against or used myself. I'll try and go over what sort of rituals, how they want to play, and stuff like that. First up would be that sort of classic big TM wall. For this, you pick the highest defense province. This time it's fairy. Pick a lot of them. I've got a mix of heretics, rogues, mystics here, which I think is more or less standard. It gives you the option of nightmare. It gives you that amnesia late age. Usually want extra rogue power. You could easily change, I think, one of these mystics to a heretic or something like that. As with this much casting power, you only need the mystic really for just those meteor showers. And then I can't remember exactly which kingdom had it, but I think it was a Barco age where they were running 2 sages. And they were really tanked up. They're relatively high in land. They were having like 160 BE. They had max guard stations and watchtowers, and they're just sort of provinces there. They act as a buffer between your regular core and your TMs, and they're good at scaling through the war. They're hard to chain. And then just a wall of avian clerics. You hit fast, you hit pretty hard, got that sustain going, and you just try and blow through the enemy like that. You will generally, with this setup, be focused on robbing horses and pure night strikes until you've got everyone unbreakable. You're probably starting with a stalwart ritual, and then once you've got unbreakables, you're either switching to a havoc or an onslaught to sort of finish the deal. Once you've got safely unbreakables, what you're going to start doing is just province by province going through assassinate wizards with your rogues and trying to close out that way. And I think this is perfectly viable even in this age where TMs seem a bit weak. You are going to struggle a little bit with Fairy because you don't have that free science that TMs are used to. But I think if you get your elites, you can sit pretty doing something like this. And there's a lot you can change. You can run less TMs, you can skip out the heretics or something if you like. You don't really need these sages. You can change this to something like warrior for more hitting power, but this is just sort of general impression of something I might see. If you know you don't really have that attacker power, you can run like 3.5 TPA with some TDs and like throw in a lot of night strikes. That's something that's happened pretty effectively before. So yeah, I think this is a pretty good representation of that sort of setup. And that's something you could see there. If you're running 22 provinces, you can still do something like this. What I might do is just cut the heretics, cut 2 TMs, and keep the core. But, you know, you do you. This is a Hipmonk hybrid setup. This is something that's really good to try and learn and copy. At the time, Hipmonks was running, I believe, Dwarf and Elf heretics. Elf had a WPA bonus, and Dwarf didn't have that TPA nerf. So I just sort of swapped those there for heretics since they've got that WPA and invis. It's not quite the same because these guys don't have quite the same staying power in terms of offense because of the converts, but... And what they do here is they run very few pure TMs, and they just focus on them being really strong, really high defense. And this sort of setup, thing is it's really hard to ignore the Orc Warriors, because there's so much offense and they just punch you in the face. But if you focus too much on the Orc Warriors, suddenly you have 8 hybrids sort of running away with it. You focus too much on the hybrids, you're getting smashed in the face by warriors. You go after the pure TMs, you're getting smashed in the face by everything. This sort of setup, it has a lot of upfront power. All those heretics are able to unload at you right at the start of war. After that, they do actually fall off a bit. This sort of heretic thing, people expect it to like have good attrition and scale well, but it's not necessarily true. They lose a lot of that offensive power, and they lose a lot of that TM power as they start to grow. Now, one of the big tricks when running big hybrid setups like this is you really, really want like 6 to 8 hybrids. And the reason is that you don't want the same hybrids being targeted every war, and you don't want all your hybrids going down. If you only run like 4 hybrids, it's really common that they're just all 4 of them are getting chained or all 4 of them are getting masked. When you have 8 hybrids, it's always different ones getting targeted each war. There's a lot of bounce back potential, and it's just a lot to deal with. At the same time, you still have these, 9 orc warriors with 500 OPA able to punch you in the face and take your calves and cows and TMs down. For these guys, I picked an elf and dwarf cleric. I feel like Hitmonk's always been one of those, single token casters, or just as few clerics as you can, because you're focusing on other stuff. So I figure Town Watch and Mist sync really well with your orc warriors and your heretics to keep them from going down, and then you focus on that power. And yeah, just 2 strong mystics for meteor showers. You can use your heretics for things like ET and Fireball. Just a couple rogues for horses and stuff. And before we were warbirds, in sort of one of our founding ages, we warred Hitmonks, I think twice back to back, lost both of them, and it's not like we even went straight back to back right out of End of War Ceasefire. We warred, we lost, we sat around for a couple days and said, hey, you want a war? Because no one else did. And, we lost to them, and I think they almost crowned. I think they got second that age, actually. So this is another classic Hitmonk style. This is the sort of style they were using when I was leading the Fairy Circle in our second age. And you just have a couple mystics and a big wall of heretics. Usually our mystics are maximum defense. If you have even any sort of offense on them, they're going to end up throwing it at a dragon. Your heretics can sometimes run a little bit of offense, but you were seeing more like the elves back then. With this age's fairy being, I think, the top TM pick for this sort of style, you can't really run offense as easily. And you're not necessarily using these heretics for Nightmare. In fact, I'd say relatively rarely are you actually using these for Nightmare. It's just because traditionally rogues are really easy to ET. They lose a lot of honor. But if you have heretics, they have a lot of Night Strike output as well. They've got a lot more wizard power. They're going to hold on to honor better. So it's not necessarily that you're expecting to Nightmare with this setup. You're just sort of like having this wall here. It's just a little bit different. Couple Avian Clerics just to sync and give you that Cleric, and then a big wall of Dwarf Tax. Similarly, I think you'd probably be starting with a Stalwart, and then switching over to Onslaught as soon as you feel safe. Back in the day when this was being run, I think Barrier was being used on basically everyone all the time. With a Barrier, it was both defense and TPA, WPA defense, so it was just very strong in general. And then you switch over to offense once you need to break TMs later age. They were running Undead at the time, they had a bit more sustain. But Dwarf Tact is just very Hitmonk-esque, so that's why I have that in there. And this is a super standard style. You'll see something like that over here. The main difference is that they opt for the heretics instead of the rogues. And that's just a personal choice for them. And I think that's pretty good. This is the sort of style I think anyone can run really effectively. It doesn't take that much finesse. Maybe you could disagree with that. This is a classic. The Ascension Dwarf Warriors. I remember them. They lost a lot, but they warred like 8 or 9 times. They were constantly exploring, and they were just punching the face of anyone that would let them. Just running a few pure TMs. I forget exactly what TMs they were using, but similar to how they're just punching you in the face with Dwarf Warriors, I figured Halfling Rogues fit that pretty well in terms of just throw TPA on them, bust through whatever you can. And what they'd do with this is they'd basically be running like 5 D-specs per acre with high watchtowers on some provinces and high GS on everyone, abusing that high BE, and just throw as much offense as they could at you and just hit you with everything. And it's really hard to go up against. It takes a strong leader to do this sort of style because it gets really difficult to know where to use this much offense. But if you can figure that out, super strong, super scary. And yeah, that's sort of the Ascension thing that we saw. Now, they were exploring a lot when they were doing this, so they were usually running a lot of specs, because they just couldn't afford the elites, which is good and bad. They maintained the offense because of the suicide style, and they had lower net worth because they were spec-based, and that gave them better chains and stuff, but usually your Dwarf, you kind of want those elites. But I think Dwarf is really strong when you basically just skip defense, because you can lean so heavily on guard stations. But you can also run tankier Dwarves, but I don't think I would when you're doing this many warriors. And yeah, really fun build. I think anyone can do that sort of thing. It's a little bit stronger when you have free builds and half-cost builds, but what you gonna do? And this is an Avarice style. Avarice was super reliable that they'd go 4 rogues, 4 mystics, sometimes 3 mystics, 1 heretic, 4 rogues. They'd almost always be running whatever rogue had a WPA buff, and if those didn't really exist, they would go whatever rogue was based on D-spec so they could pump guilds really strong. So their focus was always on high WPA rogues so that the rogues could focus on ETs. Their mystics, usually it was like 3 mystics that were just pure WPA that can help out on Night Strike runs. You're meteor showering everything. You're doing your best. And then usually you would want 1 mystic or so. Just do something like that. They'd have at least 1 mystic that was like, they're a little bit bigger, and they've got like 4 EPA, and they just slowly gain land on them to sort of help them secure an economic victory. And then they would usually go just 1 big wall of synced for usually tacticians, if not tacticians, be some sort of avian. And that way they'd run 0 racks, everyone was perfectly synced, and everyone was expected to be on time, and you just had really big, strong waves. Everyone hit at once, everyone was very orderly. I just popped them in 1 Elf Cleric, because they sort of liked having that 1 token PF caster, if it was that sort of age. Or, you know, in this case, 1 Town Watch caster. They would have, like, you know, a single human paladin for whatever spell, stuff like that, when it was available. Other times, if they were, you know, didn't know if they liked undead or orc, they'd do something like this. They'd run half orc, half undead, just so they can hedge against, you know, whatever one's being stronger. But as long as they maintained that sync, that was really their goal. And they would also plus and minus hours to try and stay just in front of the enemy, so they could always chain with a really long army out cycle. That takes a little bit of finesse as well, but you do a lot more chain damage when you do that sort of thing. This is the sort of build, I think before we were actually tagged as war builds, when we were still focused on province building, and we just wanted to have a lot of wars. So after we warred Hitmonks and got our face crushed a couple times, I'm like, okay, let's run essentially that style with my own little twist. Because we've seen it before, let's see now if we can execute it. And I think we did pretty well with it. Some notable changes. I wasn't a fan of... I'm not a fan of heretics. I really love hybrid mystics. I always have. I think having the guild bonus for hybrid mystics is a lot stronger than having just whatever WPA heretics can fit in. The extra mana. Problem with this is you usually don't have much thief power. Usually you're relying heavier on having just watchtowers when you do this. And you might have even seen something like this. I believe we had mostly mystics. We had a couple heretics, I'm pretty sure. And your goal here is that these guys tank up, and at least a couple of them get sort of pseudo-unbreakable, and they've got enough WPA that they hold their peasants, and they slowly grow peasants, and you sort of win an economic war. You're able to slay dragons really well because you've got just a lot of defense. And then, similar to them, they just ran that big wall of warriors. We ran a mixture of clerics and warriors on the orc. And I believe just because a few people felt like torturing themselves, we just threw in a few avian tax that age. And that was a lot of fun. And this sort of setup, it works really well. It lacks in a few ways, but in the end, you've got enough people attacking that even if a lot of your provinces aren't super high offense, you can really count on warriors getting hit first. And then you can really count on those clerics happening. These tacticians were usually pretty suicide-y. So we were able to bait so many hits onto our core doing this that our hybrids were able to convert defense and get pretty tanky and safe. This sort of thing's a lot of fun. You get to target a lot of armies. You get to have a lot of different playstyles all in one. And you get to just sort of hopefully rely on these rogues to carry you through. For every 2 hybrid mystics I have, I feel like that can take the spot of 1 pure mystic really reliably. My sort of theory of hybrids is that you want to be 2/3 as good as an attacker and 2/3 as good as a TM, because that gets you 4/3 of a province, so you're better than a core and you're better than a TM. So you can slot those in instead of those pure TMs, and they sort of act as your core, they help you chain. And, we did pretty well that age. I think we got, like, 7 wars and won 6 of them or something like that. I think we lost a Barco at some point. Okay. And then this sort of thing's my favorite. Screw-ups. This sort of kingdom, they're going to be running probably Godspeeds a lot of the time. Sometimes Onslaught. And everything's attacking. And what they're actually going to do is they're going to standardize the amount of defense they keep, and whatever you have that's offense, you hit with it. So these people, they're going to be sending their elites on attacks a lot of the time. They're going to be suiciding you, and because there's just so many people coming at you so fast and so hard, they just try to run away with it. They're going to run Godspeed, they're going to be faster than you, they're going to be taking your honor. If you ignore these war heroes, they're going to slowly scale through the rest of the age. You're going to think that you want to massacre and chain these TMs because they're so weak, and you're right, but then you still have 17 people punching you in the face. All of these people, because they're running O-spec offenses, you can really spend your end of war ceasefires making runes and gold, pumping insane rituals, spamming dragons. You can even leave your end of war ceasefires early. And you sort of have a weird mix. A lot of these undead, they're going to be running pretty low defense, and then they're also going to be pumping a lot of wizards. They're going to probably have 5 TPA on a bunch of random core for big Night Strike runs. And if they don't just blow you out of the water, they might just withdraw up honor and do it all over again. Slowly acquire a stupid amount of honor on all these provinces. The war heroes, they maintain honor and they get more benefits, but even the provinces like tax and warriors and clerics, they're going to use that honor to have more offense, more TPA, more WPA, and they'll just punch you with it. So this sort of thing, super successful. We saw it win honor crowns. We saw it be a general plague on the server. Very fun to imitate, very successful. Love that sort of style. Very similarly, we've got an Atlas style. Atlas was not going to run maybe just 5 or 6 TMs. They're not even going to be well picked. They're going to be just pretty much everyone in the kingdom is going to pick whatever they want. And their TMs, because there's so few of them, they can pretty reliably be at the top. They're going to be soaking up more honor than when you have 8 or 10 TMs. They're going to have more defense because they're going to be bigger. And, everyone's sort of playing their own style. You've got a huge mix of races and personalities, but what they all have in common is they're all going to be high offense. They're going to be punching you. But all of them are going to be very different. It's going to be very hard to figure out what you want to do. As this Orc Warrior might have 30% guard stations and 30% barracks. This Orc War Hero might have no guard stations and 30% training grounds. This guy's going to have watchtowers, this guy won't. And, you think you've got weaknesses you can pick apart, but just the sheer amount of offense coming at you makes it really tough to save your TMs. They're going to chain every single TM, and it doesn't matter if they only have 5 TMs themselves. You're not really going to be able to chain them, not when, your whole kingdom's getting smashed. So I've lost to this sort of thing a lot. When Atlas was sort of running Ghetto Nightmares, I believe that was the same age, we lost back-to-back to Hitmonks. We also lost 2 wars to that. And I remember they just had like a couple big elves. Their TPA and WPA wasn't even that good, but they just had so much honor. We couldn't hit them. They were out of net worth range, and then they were just punching us constantly in the face with their core. And our TMs just couldn't manage it. So. And then sort of a more classic style I used to run, where you're sort of focusing on defense in a way more than offense. Your goal here is to have a lot of core and hybrid that the enemy can't chain. They can only hit you like one time. So all these provinces are running forts. These guys are running forts. And your goal is to get in a position where the enemy can only hit you once and not twice. And when they can only hit you once, it makes chaining really slow. It lets you really work on attrition and economy because you've got all this TM power. You've got all this sort of economic and tanking power. And then you're just slowly whittling them away. And you've got just enough core that you can hit some TMs. Usually these elf clerics end up really big. They end up with like 12 EPA, 12 D-specs per acre, and they're the largest provinces. They're really hard to hit. They can raise, they can massacre to really wear down the enemy core. If you wear down some enemy TMs with your avians, then these guys are going to be able to start massacring them out. It's really easy to slay dragons. These guys have a ton of defense. These guys have a ton of defense. And that's a style I've played a lot. It's really fun.